Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of Speedway Soccer Live. I am Davey Shepard, joined tonight by my good friends Ben Wright, Will Bowling. We are presented to you by Broadway Sports Media. We're proud to be here again tonight for the second week in a row. And with no Nashville Soccer show, we know we got to get our man Will Bowling out here. Will, how are you tonight?
I'm good. Yeah, thank you guys for having me. This is a sweet setup.
We like it. We're new to it, but we've been enjoying it so far. Yeah. The guys at Broadway have kind of got us rolling on it. So we've been doing the pregame shows, which they've been fun so far. We did the live episode last Thursday, so we're back with another one this week. And hey, we got 2 0-0 draws to break down from the previous week. But I think they played out totally separately, and I'm sure you guys would agree with that. They seemed like totally opposite styles of games, despite the score being the same. So why don't we start out with the match away against New England Revolution? Ben, let's start at the top with the fact that there was a COVID positive test on the team. The team wasn't allowed to practice. Walk us through kind of the storyline with that.
Yeah, so I mean, we haven't really got a ton of specifics from the club on it. They're keeping details pretty scarce, I think, to try to protect player privacy, which I understand. What we do know is that sometime the week before the New England game, they, like you said, a player tested positive. It looks like, from what we've been able to gather, that they at least practiced on Monday and Tuesday, potentially later than that, but definitely missed a couple days of practice while they waited for everybody else to test negative. So that already kind of threw a wrench into things. And then going to New England is going to be the longest road trip that they take this season. It's a long flight, and then they have to drive after they get to the airport to get to Foxborough. So just a long road trip on top of missing all their strikers, 3 strikers, David Akam as well, and a couple other players. So I mean, it was just a rough week for them. And I think you kind of saw that in the lineup that they put out and how they played. I mean, obviously, I think that they're a team who wants to get 3 points from every game, but I think what it boils down to is they really went out there to bottom line play for a draw and make the game difficult for New England, and I think they did that for sure.
Well, kind of piggybacking off of that, the lineup was one of the more interesting ones that we've seen. You had Brian Anunga in the lineup. Matt LaGrassa makes his first start. Derek Jones as the false 9. And it was obviously just aside from the start, it looked like they were going to struggle to score goals. That was the story of the evening. But what did you think of maybe some of those USL players getting a call up for the start that night?
Yeah, I thought that LaGrassa was maybe the surprise of the guys that were in there. Derek Jones, I think a lot of us expected that he was going to be the pick to play at that false 9 position, especially the way he played the game before that. I thought he did some really good things. Thought that he had probably the most directness in the final third. Was really good at kind of shrugging guys off, being physical at the top of the box, which we haven't seen Nashville do a lot of. But I thought LaGrassa was maybe the surprise of that match. But I think if you offered Gary Smith 0-0 coming out of New England with the personnel that Nashville has right now, that was probably the plan. Try to get a set piece opportunity, try to get a goal off another corner kick like Nashville has done a lot of this season. But I think you saw a team that's going to work really hard off the ball, a guy in LaGrassa that covers a lot of ground, that's going to be able to press a lot when Nashville doesn't have possession. And that was clearly the objective, to hold New England off the score sheet. They did that. So it's probably the first of 2 0-0 wins for Nashville SC in the week, where you can confidently say, all right, that's a result that you take.
Ben, let's talk a little bit about the formation. So we've touched on personnel. It wasn't ideal. It kind of seemed more 4-3-3, right?
Yeah, for sure. You saw Dax McCarty and Brian Anunga both start, who Anunga obviously is a newer face on the team, but he's played a couple times before, and I think has put in some really good performances. So with Godoy missing, I don't think it was a shock that Anunga got the start. But like Will mentioned, LaGrassa, I don't think anybody was really expecting to see start, and definitely not in a flat 4-3-3. They really just, especially in New England, it looked like they went in there with the goal of just clogging the midfield and forcing New England wide, which I think they did for the most part. But I mean, LaGrassa is a guy who was really consistent performer at the USL level. At one point, midway through their second season, he had appeared in every match they played. And I think he's not a guy he wasn't flashy at the USL level, but he was consistent. You knew what you were going to get from him every game. And I think in his 2 starts so far in MLS, we've kind of seen a similar performance from him. He's not going to blow anybody away, but he's also not going to make any huge mistakes. So a solid 6, 7 out of 10 performance every week.
Yeah, and I think you could argue he was Gary's favorite performer at the USL level, right? Maybe along with Michael Reed. Obviously, he had the injury in the second season, so that's going to do some damage. But LaGrassa, he loved him at the USL level. Hadn't seen as much of him as we had seen of other guys at the MLS level. But that being said, the performance you've gotten out of him for 2 games in a row, I think is pretty substantial. And we'll talk more about the other match here in just a second. But the other name I want to touch on, Brian Anunga, I think he was one of the better performers both against New England and in the second game as well. That kind of brings us to the point of Anibal Godoy has not been available for the last 2 matches. We're not going to speculate on the reason why there. We know that there was a positive COVID-19 test, and all we know is that Anibal Godoy has not been available since last weekend. So obviously the team hopes for his return. He is as integral as a member of the roster as there is, but not available the last 2 matches. To be able to go out without arguably, one of your most important players, maybe the most important player, Will, what are your thoughts on that, the team able to put in the shift without him?
Yeah, I think Anunga is as one-dimensional of a player as there is for Nashville SC, but at the number 6 position as a holding midfield player, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because that's a really important position to have to win the ball high up the pitch, to try to protect your center backs, protect your fullbacks, protect really the back line of defense as a whole. So you're okay with having a guy whose job is strictly there to defend. And honestly, maybe that's a game Anunga rotates in anyway against New England when you're trying to just defend with the personnel they have in the final third, or maybe the personnel they don't have in the final third right now. I don't think that was the worst game for Anunga to feature and to be the guy to play alongside Dax McCarty. But it just makes Dax McCarty's role that much more important, right? We know he's been the leader of this team on and off the field. We've seen what he can do in the box on corner kicks, where he's the shortest guy in the field, and he somehow still is winning headers at the front post to set up Nashville on corner kick opportunities. So it makes his role that much more important. But so far, guys, through 2 games without Anibal Godoy in the side, Dax McCarty's been up to the challenge, and Nashville hasn't conceded.
Possibly the story of the night was the performance out of Joe Willis. He makes backup team of the week for MLS. He goes out there, puts in a good shift. I think it was 7 saves, 8 saves that night, Ben. I don't have the stat in front of me.
6, I think.
6, okay, yeah. Really, really solid performance and some pretty big ones in tight positions. And then he backs that up in the very next game as well, posting another shutout. How's his evolution been as a player, Ben? I think that, if I'm correct, he's now set a new personal record for clean sheets in a season, and it seems to be that he's playing at possibly the highest level he's ever played at MLS. Would you agree with that?
No, I definitely think that's true. I think he's also playing behind the best defense he's ever played in MLS, which obviously helps. But yeah, when Nashville signed him, I mean, I personally was a little bit underwhelmed, and I think a lot of people were. He had just been a pretty average keeper in MLS up until then. But I think it goes back to Mike Jacobs valuing the undervalued. That's kind of been his mantra for building the team. And clearly he saw something in Willis that he thought was worth investing in and kind of making a cornerstone of this roster. He's one of 3 people who's played every minute of the season so far. So yeah, I mean, I definitely think this is the best season he's had in his career. And I think he's definitely overperformed what we've seen from him so far in MLS.
So probably the only other thing we need to touch on in that game, and actually, sorry, I'm moving into the second game, but before I get ahead of myself, as far as the way the game played out, it was exactly, I think when you saw that lineup, what we kind of expected it would be. Hold on for dear life, try to grab the point, and look, for a team that was at that point 5th in the table above you, I just think it's a good result. I don't think you can argue with a point on the road against a team that far ahead of you at this point in the season when you're in a playoff position, you've got a game in hand, and you have a new signing on the way, and you have several players in your starting lineup that aren't available to you through injury. Good result for me, good point on the road. Ben, Will, final thoughts on that game?
I think if you're a fan of Nashville trying to get in a Nashville Soccer Club, this was probably not the game for you, because Nashville went in expecting and hoping to try to get 0-0 and maybe nick one at the end for 1-0 or do whatever they can to score, obviously. But this was not the most free-flowing, creative game in the history of the beautiful game. And I think I texted Davey at halftime and said, this is one of the slower, more unwatchable games of soccer I've ever watched. And it's a great thing for Nashville that it is. So, if you're a kind of a fan that's 1 foot in, 1 foot out, you might more be 2 feet out now at this point, but certainly a result Nashville will take.
Well, I think maybe the interesting thing is that they take what was, I would agree with you, probably the hardest to watch game they've played all season. And in the very next match, they come out. In the first half, I think it's the most crisp that the passing has looked the entire season. I think that players were putting themselves in very, very good positions. To your point, Will, about Brian Anunga, yeah, I would agree with you that we are used to seeing him sit back so much. He was very front-footed in the match at the midweek, and we saw him go out. And again, another lineup against Minnesota United that was hindered by injury. We had no Hani Mukhtar available due to rotation, in which Gary Smith said after the game, Randall Lee all back in the starting lineup, Derek Jones as well, Alex Moyle on the wing back returning to the starting lineup. And then Matt LaGrassa gets a start again, so we're definitely not anywhere close to full strength. The result still finishes 0-0, but there were some high-quality chances in that game. Derek Jones, right out of the gate, should have put a goal away. And we'll talk, I'm sure, about Alan Wynn here in just a minute. Guys, your thoughts on the game against Minnesota United. Again, another team very far above us in the table, another limited lineup. What did you think of the performance, vice versa, compared to the match against New England, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was their best first half performance just in terms of chance creation. I mean, I tweeted out at halftime that was the highest expected goal total they'd had in a first half this season. I mean, even including the 4-2 win over Atlanta. And I was really surprised to see that much attacking output from them. I think it was kind of a good and bad performance because we've struggled to see them create that level of consistent goal scoring. I mean, that chance that Derek Jones missed in the 5th or 6th minute was one that I think Cadiz or Rios or Baji, I mean, Cadiz hasn't played, but a forward would kill to get. That's the kind of chance that we've been wanting to see Nashville create, where they're putting their strikers in a position that's almost harder to miss than it is to score. So I think on one hand, it was encouraging that they were able to create chances that consistently, but I think it also just goes to show, I mean, obviously they were playing without a recognized striker, but just how finishing has let them down this season. You don't want to be too harsh on Derek Jones. He's a holding midfielder playing out of position as a forward, but I mean, that's a chance that you have to finish. You kind of hinted at the Alan Wynn miss. That's another chance that you have to finish. And so it feels like now that we're seeing Nashville be able to create these chances more consistently, well, now the finishing is kind of letting them down. So it's a little bit a good and bad performance at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. And I told Davey after the match that it's only disappointing considering how well you played in the first half. Because that's another game, I think, that if you go in saying, hey, you're going to get 0-0 out of this one again, I think a lot of Nashville fans would take that against that Minnesota side. And I think a lot of the staff in the front office would take that as well and say, look, this is who this team is right now without Daniel Rios, without Dom Baji, with Abu Danladi having to come off the bench, and without Hani Mukhtar. But it only becomes a disappointing result because of the chances that you had in the first 45 minutes. And I totally agree on the Derek Jones chance. I think that's one that you've got to finish early on in that game in order to set the tempo. And it really is kind of the same story for this Nashville side, that sometimes their best moments have not been rewarded with a goal. And then you nick a goal at the end, the first goal ever, I guess the first goal ever in the run of play, the first win, totally against the run of play against FC Dallas when you maybe don't deserve one. So I think it's disappointing just because of how bright Nashville looked in the final third in that first half. And guys, I don't know what your thoughts on this, but I think Alex Moyle actually playing up top a little bit, kind of in a 4-1-2-1-2, a 4-3-1-2 diamond. I thought he had some really good things to do early on in that game and created some pretty nice chances.
I would agree with that 100%. Yeah, I mean, it's no secret. I'm super high on what he brings to the game, no matter what, just working backwards and forwards. I think he's one of the more creative players out there. And I thought he put in a good shift. I think it's the first time we've seen him maybe kind of flop around position-wise so far this season. But he's shown that when his bell's rung, he's going to show up, put in the work, no matter what the position is for Gary. And that's why I think Gary just starts him every game that he's available. Like, it's no questions asked. He's got to be one of the first guys pinned in after Zimmerman, after Willis, after Romney. He's got to be one of the first guys on the sheet for Gary. So no surprise from me there. I think maybe a storyline from the game, and I was in the box and I tweeted about it quite a bit that night. We've seen referees in big moments this season kind of have some things that affected Nashville SC. I think this was probably the worst overall officiated match. He kind of just lost it from the start. Inconsistent call, and it wasn't just against Nashville SC, mind you. Things that were a foul one time were not a foul the next. Things that were a foul on one team weren't a foul on the other, back and forth each way. And it was just one of the ones I said in the box early to Drake Hillis from the Tennessee, and I said, this one has loses control written all over it, and it didn't quite get that bad, but it was super chippy there near the end of the first half and going into the second half, and it absolutely disrupted the flow of the first half as that wore on. Anybody think it had a particular effect on the game other than myself?
I couldn't believe how many professional fouls and little nicks that Minnesota had without ever getting a yellow card. That was the thing that surprised me, where there are a lot of stoppages in play for professional fouls. Nashville would try to play it up top to Wheel or to Jones. Center back would have a kick out at the center forward or the winger that received the ball and would go down. Those were happening over and over and over without a Minnesota player ever being cautioned in that game. And then Randall Leal has one kind of overzealous challenge, and he gets the first yellow card of the game. I thought that was the weirdest part, was the referee really did lose control from the start because he didn't give out more cautions, I think, early on in that game. There were one or two in the first half. I thought Minnesota probably deserved a yellow. A couple of shirt pulls, a couple of just professional fouls as Nashville tried to counterattack. But it was just very inconsistent because there were some little kicks where a guy would go down and it was immediately called a foul. Others where the referee would say play on. I'm okay with either extreme as long as you're consistent throughout the 90 minutes.
Yeah, like Will just said there.
Go ahead, Ben. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good. Like Will just said, I wish he would have just picked one.
Yeah.
Either let them play on or call everything. I didn't think it was particularly terrible. I mean, I didn't notice the referee probably as much as it sounds like you did, Davey, but I felt like more than anything, it just disrupted the flow of the game. Especially like in the middle period of the first half, it just felt like there was a call every 30 seconds, and it just really chopped the game up and made it really stop-start.
The one thing I will say is that I'm probably a little more biased because that's the first time we've heard boos in Nissan Stadium. So it was the first time where a call goes against Nashville and the fans are up in arms against the referee. There are probably more things the referees got away with without us really sitting back and thinking like, well, maybe the fans do have a case there because there weren't any fans in the stadium.
Yeah, it's a great point, Will. And the thing for me that stood out the most is there was a pullback against Derek Jones called about midway through the first half. He's down in the attacking field. He kind of uses his body to get off. He wins the ball and is kind of in and towards the box. They call it back on a foul. And then there was one where he kind of got pulled to the ground at the start of the second half near midfield that was not called. It was just that same thing of just inconsistency that, to me, I just struggled with. It wasn't too much. I never like to make the refs the storyline, and I never think a team should be able to blame a loss on referees. I think those things balance out over the course of the season. But the ref inserted himself into the storyline the other night, and that always frustrates me. We mentioned the name earlier. I think probably a big thing that we've got to touch on before we move into preview of Sporting Kansas City is the return of Abu Danladi to the field. He did not start. We got about 25, 30 minutes out of him that night. I mean, you have to say he looked super sharp. He's a lively player. He gets into space. He played a few guys in, including Alan Wynn, who was not able to come up with a shot on goal at that point in time. What did you guys think of having Abu Danladi back and even just having an actual forward back to finish out the match?
I think that's a guy who really is going to benefit from Yonder Cadiz being in the fold. Because when I think of an Abu Danladi, I think of a guy that is best coming off the wing and cutting inside or playing in a 4-4-2 diamond and kind of being that second striker, playing off the shoulder of more of a target center forward. I think that's a guy who can have a really big final portion of this season for Nashville SC. And like you said, I think he's maybe the paciest, the more direct player that Nashville needs. And if you've heard our show on the Zone, you know that I'm well documented. Nashville needs to be way more direct in the final third. I think it's way too horizontal. It's way too safe. I think Abu Danladi gives you that different dimension to run at defenders and just get by them one-on-one. I haven't seen enough of that from Nashville SC, and maybe I'm a European snob that's grown up watching the Premier League, and I want more guys to, meg somebody and dribble around a defender and get in the box and score. But I think Danladi gives you that best dimension of being able to beat a man one-on-one. And with fresh legs in a second half, maybe his best role is as the super sub right now.
Yeah, I think, Will, what you said about him being best, kind of playing off the shoulder with another striker, I think that's spot on. And I'm really interested to see what Gary Smith does formationally going forward. I think it's pretty clear that the 4-2-3-1, or maybe it's even a 4-4-1-1, is kind of his preferred formation at this point. But I think the 4-3-3 that we've seen in the past two games does give him some interesting options. It's just a much more fluid attack. With that three line, you can see those three forwards just rotate a lot. I mean, Derek Jones was a nominal striker, but you saw him, especially in the game against Minnesota, he would pop up on the left, on the right. Alex Mule would take a shift through the center. Randall Lyall would pop up in the center. So I think it gives a lot more flexibility, and it really allows their fullbacks to be a more focal point of the attack. But yeah, I think with a guy like Dunladi, especially once you get Baji, Rios, and back and healthy, and Cadiz on the field, having him play centrally, hold the ball up, draw defenders in, and then have a guy like Cadiz on the shoulder who can run in behind, I think that could cause a lot of problems. And yeah, like you said, I think they do need to be more direct. I think one of their defaults is if they can't find anything in possession, they just resort to crossing. And I think we saw that at USL. I think that was one of the criticisms of the team consistently, is that they just crossed a lot. And I think at times, every team does it, really. I mean, I've heard some people say that if you're crossing, it's just because you can't find a better option. And I think a lot of times that tends to be true. But I think Nashville, especially, if they don't hit you on the counter initially, they'll recycle possession, work it to the wings, and just hit a ball into the box. So I think it'll be interesting to see what they do formationally to try to counter that a little bit.
Guys, a few minutes left on this episode of Speedway Soccer Live. Let's look at the upcoming match against Sporting Kansas City. We've talked about a few names: Yonder Cadiz, Daniel Rios, Dom Baji. Ben, do you expect any of those three forwards to be available for the club this weekend? Hani Mukhtar, we do expect. Gary said that was just a rotation choice, so we think he'll be back healthy for the big match this weekend. What about any of those other guys?
Yeah, so we specifically asked him about Daniel Rios in the press conference after the game. He said that he expects him to be available for selection within the next week. So, I mean, it sounds like there's a chance that he could be available on Sunday. I would be shocked if he started. I think it would be, if he's healthy, I would expect him to be on the bench. And then Yonder Cadiz was supposed to start training today. I'm not sure if that happened or not. Actually, I guess he was supposed to start training on Wednesday. As of a couple minutes ago, he has not been officially added to the active roster, but I think they're expecting him to be. So I would expect him to at least be available for selection on Sunday. But I mean, at that point, he'll have been training with the team for 2 or 3 days. They might put him on the bench just because they don't really have anybody else. So I'm interested to see if he's involved, and if he's involved, how much he's involved. But yeah, at this point, if you can get a healthy striker on the field, I think they will. I think Sporting Kansas City is a team who you're going to need to, I mean, that Derek Jones chance that they missed against Minnesota, that's the kind of chance, if you miss that early in the game, it could be your only chance against Sporting Kansas City. So I think they'll be desperate for a finisher for sure.
Guys, even on games played with Sporting Kansas City, and they're at 26 points in the Western Conference, Nashville sits at 18. We said it again, is this another one of those games where a draw on the road is good enough against a team that far above you in the table? Will, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely think so. Knowing Mike Jacobs and knowing Nashville SC, they have come from a Sporting KC pedigree. That's what Mike Jacobs knows. That's where he came from originally. I think they want to get more out of this match because it is kind of the, homecoming in a way for a Mike Jacobs-led team in Major League Soccer. But I think this is one you need to show more creativity going forward. I would like to see something else. As Ben said, I think I would like to continue to see the 4-3-3 definitely, and see if Nashville can get something out of the run of play. But I think if you score and you draw, this is a successful game. I don't think 0-0 is successful 3 times in a row. I think if you go there, you get a goal, you come away with a point, I think you're feeling much better about yourself than the opposite of now going 3 straight matches, either 0-0 or coming away with nothing and also getting no points. You got to find the back of the net. You can't miss out on that 3 times in a row.
Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I think you don't want to get a 3rd draw in a row. Like Will said, I definitely don't think you want another scoreless draw. I think Kansas City is a really, really good team. I mean, they've had an argument to be the best team in the Western Conference for long stretches this season. You're also catching them at a good time. Alan Pulido is their DP striker, the player they finally went out and spent big on the transfer market, and he's gone on international duty. So they're without their best striker. But, I mean, they're still a really dangerous side. They have one of the better youth academy systems in the country. So, I mean, we've seen them miss players through injury this year. They've had guys like Gianluca Busio step in, play really well, get interest from European clubs. Jalen Lindsay has kind of filled in for Graham Zusi at the right back spot. And he's another player who's come through their academy. So I think they have a clearly defined system, and their academy players have grown up playing that system and can just plug in and play. So I think even with players missing through injury, they're still a difficult side to play against. They're really good at home. And I think we've seen them this year really bounce back after a horrible season last year, which is kind of just an anomaly. I think they've showed that they're still a really good side. So I think even without Pulido, they'll still be dangerous. They'll still create chances. I think Nashville will get chances against them, though. We've seen them struggle defensively. They've kind of rotated their center backs a good bit. But yeah, it's not going to be an easy game by any stretch of the imagination.
So we'll wrap up the NSC talk with that thought. Guys, as we finished the show last week, we'll do the same thing. Will, one thought from the Premier League about a team that is not your favorite club. We'll start with you, and we'll go from there.
Ooh, man, that's tough. I guess I'll say, throwing piles of money at your back line does not solve all your problems if you're Manchester City so far. And at this point in the season, are we already thinking about where Pep Guardiola is going to go next? Because I don't see Pep Guardiola coming back if he underachieves this year again at Manchester City. This is a team I expected to come back and win the league this year with better defensive reinforcements. At the time I made that prediction, there was a thought that the back 3 could have been Kalidou Koulibaly, Emerick Laporte, and Nathan Ake. Ruben Diaz is there instead of Koulibaly. Long term, he's a better fix there. Really, really solid center back coming from RB Leipzig. But I don't know. That's the thing that surprises me most, that Leeds United and Rodrigo can get a point against them when, as they continue to spend, the results are still kind of the same. The kryptonite hasn't changed for Pep and City. Ben?
Yeah, I think Aston Villa has kind of not got nearly as much talk as they want. I saw a tweet the other day. Leeds United got more publicity for beating Liverpool 4-3 than Aston Villa did for beating them 7-2.
Losing to Liverpool 4-3, right?
Right. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. True.
But I mean, Villa's in second place in the table. They have the best goal difference in the league, and even aside from that Liverpool game, which was just insane. I mean, they played some really exciting soccer. I think you're seeing Jack Grealish kind of show all the big clubs why they probably should have signed him.
So good.
And I think it's just if you would have told me that 4 games in the table would look like this, I would have told you were insane. Everton and Aston Villa at the top, Leicester up there as well. It's been a weird year all around, and I think the start to this season of the Premier League, which is kind of billed as like the return to normal, I think it's showing that stuff is not normal, and it's really entertaining right now.
You guys touched on some big ones. I'm going to go with not a Chelsea story since we're doing other teams, but a former Chelsea man, Jose Mourinho, with the 6-1 victory over Manchester United. Listen, I think obviously Liverpool losing 7-2 is the result so far of the season. And I said it, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever it was, I said that Chelsea drawing West Brom 3-3 and being down 3-0 is going to just be there's going to be a lot of storylines this season. It just so happened the very next week I kind of looked right from saying that. But that 6-1 win for Tottenham, I think in a lot of ways is more surprising even than Villa beating Liverpool 7-2. You just never expected Jose's side to score that many goals. And on the United end, it just always seems like there's somehow more questions than answers ever given. Even when it's in the affirmative, even when it's like, oh man, it looks like they're starting to figure stuff out. Well, then the questions are like, well, maybe Ale should stick around. Maybe Harry Maguire is coming good. It's just, I don't know where that franchise is headed. And to be one of the biggest clubs in the world, and to just seem totally rudderless, it's crazy to me. And Ben, I know you're a fan, and we won't get into the details. We can do that again. But that's just to see a club that huge, totally rudderless. It's really, really weird. It's almost the closest thing I can think of in American sports is like where Notre Dame was forever, just totally meaningless in football. That's how it seems right now, and I don't know how it ends. We're going to end it with a comment from Philip Williams. Really awesome to be at the game. Hopefully Nashville SC continue to get good results and we can get healthy and near full strength. Hey, that says it all, man. We're getting good results without being healthy. Fans back in the stadium. I think there was about 4,000 people there the other night of a possible 7,000. Hopefully we see more and more people get there in a healthy, safe way. Looked like they had seats zip-tied so that people couldn't be too close together, which I think is a very, very smart thing to do. And I hope we just kind of take advantage of that. Fans have a good time and we see some good soccer. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I wasn't at the game, but I mean, I think I texted you guys during the game. It absolutely made the TV product better. Being able to hear fans in the stands, it made the atmosphere better. It made the game seem more alive. And I think the players, and Gary Smith talked about it after the game, just what a difference it made. Exciting to see fans back, even in a really limited capacity for sure.
I agree completely. Guys, we're going to hit up our Twitters real fast. I'm on Twitter as Davey T. Shep, Davey T. Shep. We've got Will Bowling at Will_bowling. And then Ben Wright at Ben WRIGHT. Make sure you check us out there for NSC coverage. Nashville Soccer Show will be back next Tuesday. Speedway Soccer will be back next week. We've got the game this weekend. I believe it is Sunday this week at 6:30 against Sporting Kansas City. And listen, a lot of big games coming up. They're going to come fast. And we'll be right here for all the coverage that you need on Speedway Soccer. Huge shout out to Broadway Sports Media for hosting us. We'll be back next week. Speedway Soccer, Nashville Soccer Show. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.